Ladies and gentlemen of the Ravens flock, my name is Christopher Linfante, bringing you today the video episode of Preview and Predictions. Now, if you are an avid reader at BaltimoreFeather.com, and if you're not, you really should be. We have great content over there for you. You already know our Preview and Prediction series goes through before every Ravens game and previews and predicts the game. Usually we give out the keys to the game, which players need to win battles, who needs to shine, what battles need to be won, whether it's the ground game versus the opponent's front seven or the passing game on the secondary, those kinds of things. We always predict. And this year I want to bring it into video format because I know a lot of our readers, a lot of our feather flockers out there really like the videos we've been pumping out recently. So I want to try and bring it in to video format. So this episode is going to be a little bit more experimental than anything. It's not going to be super crazily put together. I want to see if I can figure out a way to make preview and predictions good as a video episode as well. And if you want to read our full write-up for the Ravens preview and predictions for this week's preseason game, the first preseason game of the 2019 season against the Jacksonville Jaguars at M&T Bank Stadium, Thursday, August 8th at 7:30 p.m., you can go to BaltimoreFeather.com and check it out there. I really recommend you do. We have a nice article up for this preseason. Now, we are not going to give any keys to the game for the preseason. We are going to give key positional battles, key players to watch, key things to watch in the preseason, because the preseason, it's not about winning and losing, although we are going to give a prediction for whether the Ravens will win or not this Thursday night. But I think it's more important to talk about what we're going to see, what we need to see out of some of these players, and the positional battles that are going on. And it's going to be difficult to say right away, especially because, we're just entering the preseason now. So we don't have much to go off of, only training camp practices. And, I haven't been to every training camp practice. I've been to one training camp practice at this point. I don't think I'll be able to go to another one. So I only have a certain frame of reference. I can read about what people are seeing. I can listen to people tell me what they're seeing at Ravens training camp, but until I see it with my own eyes, I really can't go off and say that someone is doing super duper well and they're going to start based on training camp. You can't do that. You have to have the preseason. And in these battles too, one training camp day, someone might be really outperforming his competitor for the starting gig, and then the preseason, the script can flip completely. This guy might not do well against actual teams out there, and the guy who was kind of on and off streaky in the Ravens practices might be a much better player in game situations. So this is the most important part for the roster building section of the offseason here. It's the preseason. You get to find gems in the rough. Players start to emerge, and it's really a preview of what's to come in the regular season. Now, I have open here on the screen, as you can see, the Baltimore Ravens depth chart, courtesy of OurLads.com. When we're looking at this depth chart, we can scroll down here and see offense and defense, trying to capture both of them in there. We can't see the cornerbacks, but that's okay. Obviously, I don't believe many of our first stringers are going to play. Willie Snead is not going to play tonight, Thursday night. Seth Roberts might play, but I don't think Ronnie Stanley will play. I doubt Marshall Yanda, maybe Orlando Brown would, but I doubt it. Lamar Jackson probably won't play. Mark Ingram probably won't play. A lot of these guys, Michael Pierce, Matt Judon probably won't play. Tony Jefferson, Earl Thomas, Jimmy Smith, Brandon Carr. I'd be surprised if Brandon Carr, Jimmy Smith, and even Marlon Humphrey would even play at all in this preseason game. I'd be very surprised. So what we're really going to look for in this first preseason game are backup players, rookie players, and players on the roster, barely on the roster bubble, looking to make an impact this preseason. And we're going to go down the list, and you can find this list. If you don't feel like watching the entire video, go to BaltimoreFeather.com. You've got this list of guys, but I'm going to go a little bit more in depth here than I will the writing, because I can really talk freely here without having to worry too much about how well the writing's coming out, right? I can really just give my thoughts as they are, which I do in the writing, but it's more, in the writing you're trying to make a piece where here I can ramble on and try to be as clear as possible, but at the same time just keep rambling until you get the point. So it's more free flowing in the video. If you want a more concise write up, BaltimoreFeather.com's got that for you. So the first player I really want to talk about is going to be Miles Boykin. Now, Miles Boykin, as you already know, is the third round wide receiver. Baltimore picked him in the third round of the draft. And he's had a fantastic training camp this offseason. Now, I went to training camp. I didn't see much out of Miles Boykin. Admittedly, though, I just think it was not his day because every other day it seems like he's doing fantastic things. I was kind of surveying the entire field, not just focusing on him. But Miles Boykin has really showed a lot on the field on training camp. You can go watch our video, by the way, on Miles Boykin on the YouTube channel because you're watching that here. Subscribe and hit the notifications bell if you haven't already, by the way. It's best way for you to get out our videos as they come out. So anyway, Miles Boykin having a tremendous training camp. That's all well and good, but at the same time, we got to be able to know Miles Boykin's the real deal here. We can't just have a training camp hero. And when I mean by training camp hero, it's somebody who does phenomenally well in training camp, before the preseason, maybe even in preseason, and doesn't pan out in the regular season, right? So we want to make sure that Miles Boykin is going to do something for the Ravens offense. Maybe this year. I would hope he would maybe put 300, 400 yards up this year, but long term. So we need to see something out of him in this first game that makes me say, okay, training camp isn't just him beating up on guys who he knows who maybe aren't going as hard as some of these Jacksonville defenders are going to be. And I fully expect Miles Boykin to play on Thursday night. I don't see why the Ravens would hold him out. He's not an immediate starter. He's not a big-time player right now. He should play on Thursday night. So I hope we see him play. Now, what we need to see out of him is a solid performance. We can't have any drops from Miles Boykin. We don't need him to do crazy things. We don't need him to run up on rack yards, on yak yards after contact. We really just need Miles Boykin to be consistent, and I want to see at least 2 catches for 25 yards at him for me to call it a successful night for Miles Boykin. Anything above that's going to be a stellar night for him. But again, no drops from him. I want to see some good routes run. I want to see if he can hit that top speed faster than he did in college, because if you watch our Miles Boykin review, you'll know that his acceleration is pretty low. That's because he's a more massive wide receiver. We want to see if that's improved a little bit, and we want to see how he fares against the defenders of the NFL and whether or not he still beats them like he would have done in college. It's a big jump. It's a major difference from college. These NFL defensive backs, defenders are going to be much more difficult to beat. So Miles Boykin, hoping he has a good night. And if he doesn't, it's not the end all for him, but we do want to see him progress. We don't want him to be another receiver that flops for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, another player we need to see a lot out of is Tress McSorley. When you look at Tress McSorley, it's unfortunate what's happened to him. And I say that because he was projected to really be the third string quarterback, develop, but at the same time contribute in other areas on the field. The Ravens want him to be like Taysom Hill of the New Orleans Saints. A guy who can contribute all over the field. He's listed as a quarterback, can be a quarterback, but can be a receiver, return man, blocker, whatever, you name it. That's what they wanted for Tress McSorley. Now, here's the problem, though. Robert Griffin III, the backup quarterback, will not play on Thursday night. There's no way. Fracture in his thumb. I think it's a hairline fracture. So McSorley's now going to have to be the guy for at least the preseason, maybe even a little bit of the regular season when it comes to the backup quarterback position. So he's going to get a tremendous amount of time this preseason. And when I went to training camp and looked at McSorley, I didn't see very much from him that made me go, wow, he's ready to take the helm here. A lot of people think he could become a quarterback that could eventually become a starter in this league. But right now, I don't think McSorley has any of those abilities ready to go. He just did not look prepared for the NFL when I looked. Not prepared for the NFL. Not prepared for the NFL is what I'm saying. He didn't look ready for the NFL. He was prepared, but not ready. He's not physically there yet. Making bad reads, making bad throws. I think it's just all the motions of the NFL are getting to his mind a little bit. Tress McSorley, we want to see a little bit out of him this preseason game. I don't expect much. I would like to see on a solid performance, the threshold for that, about 50% completion on 10 passes. So 5 completions out of 10 for 50 yards. I don't even need to see a touchdown. I just don't want to see an interception. I mean, even if he throws an interception, it won't be the end of the world. just don't look terrible. Don't look like, the world's worst quarterback. Now, I don't think he's going to look great. I honestly, my gut instinct is that he's not going to look good at all. Just because it's his first NFL real game experience, it's going to be a wild night for him, I would imagine. And I think that's going to harm the Ravens' chances of winning, as we'll go into later. But Tress McSorley, if you want to consider it a solid performance, he's got to go 50% on 10 attempts, 5 completions, for about 50 yards passing. Even if it's a little under 50, I don't care. If it's a little over 50, I don't care. If he wants a stellar performance, we want to see above 60% completion for like 70 yards and a touchdown. But I don't think we're going to get that out of Tress McSorley. Another player we have to watch as Ravens fans. Everybody knows him. It's Kenneth Dixon. Now, Kenneth Dixon, the deal with Kenneth Dixon is that he's probably not going to make this roster this year. As you might be asking yourself, like, Chris, he had a great year last year playing in those 6 games towards the end of the year with Lamar Jackson. You can look at that. 10 attempts per game, yards per game, 55 yards a game, average 5.6 yards a carry. How is he not going to make this roster? When you look down here, 2016, where's the 2017 stats? Not there. He only played 12 games in 2016, 6 games last year in 2018. Why is that? That's because Kenneth Dixon can't stay on the field. He's been injured, I think, every year since coming into the league. He's been suspended once. And, you kind of feel bad for him with all those injuries. But, the Ravens, it's a business, and they got to make a business decision here. And they did so in the draft. They went out and got Justice Hill. Justice Hill's a speed back. They're to complement Mark Ingram and Gus Edwards, not Kenneth Dixon. So his job is completely up for grabs here. It's going to be very difficult for him to make the roster. They gave a giant financial investment into, well, not giant, but, in Kenneth Dixon's terms here, a giant financial investment into Mark Ingram. Gus Edwards had a breakout year last year. He did phenomenally well. I don't think they're going to want to get rid of him. And they drafted Justice Hill. And I don't think they're going to carry 4 running backs, especially if they want to keep a fullback. There's no way they're going to carry 4 running backs. So Kenneth Dixon really has to, he's either got to force them to keep him somehow, which I really don't think can happen, or make another roster at this point. And that's really going to be his attempt, is making another roster, maybe getting traded somewhere. Duke Johnson, actually, just today, was traded to the Texans from the Broncos. There's a market for running backs, and I think Kenneth Dixon could be picked up somewhere, but it's this history of injury that's really forcing him out of Baltimore. Now, he's got to have a good game, a good preseason, and it's got to start today. And the first thing that's got to happen is he's got to have no injuries. That means, just no injuries. Don't get injured. And it's difficult for him to force that to happen, but he's got to do something. And it's more luck than anything with that. But he's also got to have a solid performance on the ground. He's got to have, at least 8 carries for 40 yards, I would say. About a 5-yard average there. Got to keep that average up. If he goes anywhere below that 5 on that average and ventures down into the 4s, it might be more difficult for a team to pick him up. But if he's still averaging 5 or above 5 point something, a team could definitely trade for him. And the Ravens would probably jump at that opportunity because they know that Kenneth Dixon is not going to fit on this roster just because of the way it's numbered against him right now. They're not going to cut Justice Hill after drafting him in the 4th round. They're not going to cut Gus Edwards. And they're certainly not going to cut Mark Ingram. So Kenneth Dixon just doesn't fit on this offense right now. That's the deal. And he's got to have a good preseason to avoid, his career in jeopardy here. Now, of course, he could turn it all around and make the Ravens keep him, but again, that's kind of unlikely. Now, the next guy we're going to look at is Chris Board right here. Chris Board, if you're not paying attention to Ravens news, you wouldn't know that Chris Board, of all people, is competing for the inside linebacker spot. Now, don't ask me how, don't ask me why. All I know is it's happening. I think Alvin Jones also is in there in the mix too, but Chris Board, I think, really has a shot to make one of 2 starting positions on this roster at the inside linebacker position. I think Patrick Onwuasor is going to start inside linebacker. It's really between Board and Kenny Young at this point. Kenny Young, the UCLA draft pick from last year. I believe it was the 4th or 5th round. But anyway, he's had a stellar training camp. A lot of coaches really like what Chris Board brings to the table. So we have to see something out of him. And I don't think he's got to have a stellar preseason to start. He's really got to have it to end. But I would like to see him, verify that the hype coming out of Baltimore on Chris Board. So if we want to see that, we're going to have to see him really today on Thursday tonight, go for 4 tackles, maybe a tackle for loss, no missed tackles, and no drop balls. If he gets an opportunity to hit someone in open space and he misses, or if he gets the opportunity to pick off a pass and drops it, there's going to be a tremendous drop in the stock price for Chris Board because, the Ravens are not going to play around. They're not going to put an inside linebacker in there who can't tackle or someone who can't capitalize on turnover opportunities. That's not what Baltimore is going to do. Now, the North Dakota State alum here, Chris Board, again, he's got to finish stronger than he starts, or at least have a solid preseason throughout. Better than Kenny Young, at least. But if he wants to have a good game on Thursday, I want to see him get 4 tackles, tackle for loss, no missed tackles, and no drop balls, if a drop ball should come to him, obviously. Moving on, though, to our positional battles here, we've got the left guard battle. Now, it was spiced up recently as Baltimore traded Alex Lewis, the former starter at left guard, to the New York Jets for a 2020 7th-round conditional draft pick. So, what does that mean for our remaining 3? Ben Powers, you've got James Hurst in there as well, and Jermaineillumine in there, all trying to make this roster and start at left guard. Well, here's the deal. Only one of these guys right here is going to start, right? There's reasons I think each of them has maybe an advantage. And not everybody can have the upper hand, but everybody's got an advantage in some dimension. If we look at Ben Powers, the guy who wants to crush defenders' dreams, right? That's what he said in a draft interview, I believe. The Oklahoma guy right here, he's 6'4", 307. He's huge. Baltimore thinks they drafted him in the 4th round. They think he can become a starter at some point in his career. They for all the things Baltimore has done in the draft, which is a lot, I think finding offensive linemen in the later rounds is probably one of the best things they do. So Ben Powers, obviously they put in, just by the history of finding good offensive linemen in these later rounds, there's a lot of pressure on him. And the Ravens think he can start eventually, but the question is when. Drafting him in the 4th round, if they start him now, they could probably push him through those four years on his contract and see what happens. But he might not be ready to start. And if he's not ready to start, James Hurst might be the guy to go to. And a lot of you might be thinking, ooh, James Hurst. Every time we hear the name James Hurst in Baltimore, people, it's pretty controversial, but most people will say that James Hurst is not good. And I don't really believe that. I think James Hurst is valuable. I think he's a very versatile offensive lineman. Not the best in any position, but I think he could fill a role. The Ravens invested a lot of money into him last year. I don't remember the specific numbers, but they gave him a new contract. And Hurst is going to be here for a little bit longer as long as he's on this contract. So the Ravens might take that financial investment they gave Hurst and prioritize that as a reason to start him. They want to utilize the money they're spending. It doesn't sound like a great, perspective from a football team building standpoint, but they're gonna. I just looked it up. They have to if they wanted to cut him, they'd have to clear $3.75 million in dead cap. But his total cap cost this year is going to be $4.75 million. If he's not starting, then that's a lot of wasted money. You could start him now, and if he doesn't do well, then you could cut him next year for a lower dead cap amount and maybe put Ben Powers in there. So that might be a reason the Ravens want to start James Hurst this upcoming year, and maybe that's why I'm kind of leaning towards him right now as the potential most likely starter, especially with Alex Lewis gone. And then, of course, you've got Jermaineillumine, a guy who's sort of been on this roster for the past 2 years, but not been on this roster. He's been off and on, literally and figuratively, in the sense that, he's been cut and he's been put on the practice squad at least once. And also, when he's on the roster, he rarely gets in. When he does get in, he looks sloppy. But the thing about Jermaineillumine is that he's looked pretty good, according to coaches and some of the media members who've been at, earlier Ravens offseason practices like OTAs and stuff. He looked really good in OTAs, not so much in training camp anymore. But he had a pretty good offseason so far. And there's a lot of hype that he could become the left guard for the team. So when you look at Jermaineillumine, you think, maybe he's the guy. But at the same time, then you've got, James Hurst being paid much more money. And, of course, Ben Powers, who they just drafted. So it's going to be a very interesting positional battle to watch. Whether or not any of these players looks great is going to be irrelevant because one of these three has to start. And I think two of them will make their roster. I think one will be cut. There's no way that Ben Powers is going to be cut. And I kind of doubt that James Hurst is going to get cut just because of his contract. I'm leaning more towards Jermaineillumine getting cut right now. But again, if he shows out in the preseason and dominates at the left guard position, the whole script's going to be flipped. Ben Powers won't get cut, but James Hurst could get cut or traded. Or someone they could cut another guard and say, okay, let's move Hurst to tackle. Let's have Illuminor at guard and make Ben Powers backup guard. James Hurst backup tackle, obviously, not starting tackle. And then they'd have room for all of them. But if they're all guards, then it's going to be difficult to keep all of them, specifically for that left guard position. Now, moving into the other positional battle to watch, it's going to be the edge rusher position. You've got Pernell McPhee, Shane Ray, Tyus Bowser, and Tim Williams all competing for about 2 or 3 roster spots. It's not exactly clear how many are going to be distributed between these guys. But these guys are really going to fight out all preseason long. Now, Tim Williams and Tyus Bowser, if you read the write-up I had on BaltimoreFeather.com, I think that they are the ones that hold all the cards. And I say that because these are two young players that can develop. They've been on the roster since 2017, okay? The Ravens will not give up on them unless they firmly believe that neither of these players can contribute to the Ravens' defense now or in the very, very near future. And they've already been on the roster into their third year now. This is prime position to get cut if you're one of these two players. And it's not good if you get cut in your third year, especially being drafted. I mean, if you were undrafted, I could get it, but being drafted in the first half, really, of the NFL draft, a second rounder and a third rounder here in Tyus Bowser and Tim Williams, respectively, they could be cut. Either of them could be cut this offseason because they haven't produced the way the Ravens want them to. Now, here's the deal, though. Let's say they both have a fantastic preseason. But let's say Pernell McPhee and Shane Ray also have a fantastic preseason. Either Pernell McPhee or Shane Ray would get cut, even if they slightly outplay Tyus Bowser and Tim Williams. As long as Tyus Bowser and Tim Williams produce highly enough to get the Ravens to think that they can contribute something, one of these two guys is going to get cut. And I would probably lean more towards Pernell McPhee because he's older, frankly. I think Shane Ray could probably do more for you with that age. Pernell McPhee's 30 years old. Shane Ray's 26 years old. But McPhee's already been with the Ravens before. That relationship might save him. Who knows? So, you wouldn't want to cut the really young guys to make room for older guys. It wouldn't make any sense. Now, of course, Tim Williams here is 25 and Shane Ray is 26. But, one's a draft bust. The other's a third-round pick with potential, right? So, it's going to be interesting to see what the Ravens end up doing with these guys. And there is a possibility all of them could make the roster. But with Jalen Ferguson and Matthew Judon as complete roster locks, it's difficult for me to say that either of them could be cut. I'm sorry, not that they would be cut. I'm saying not that they would be cut. That, all 4 of these guys would make the team, essentially. And I don't believe it's going to be possible here. I believe that at least one player, maybe 2, could be cut, depending on how this preseason unfolds. Now, the question is, which 1 or 2 is it going to be? You've got to lean towards, right now, I really think it's going to be Pernell McPhee at this point, although he can do a lot for us. Just because Shane Ray is younger than McPhee, that might be a good deal. And if Tyus Bowser and Tim Williams do something in this preseason, it's going to be difficult to cut them. Now, if they do nothing, then they're probably going to get cut. At least one of them would be cut, and that's the end of it. Then both these guys can make the roster. So it's really a 2 versus 2 battle here. It's Pernell McPhee and Shane Ray versus Tyus Bowser and Tim White. I'm sorry, not Tim White, Tim Williams. So we'll see how that transforms throughout the preseason. Now, That's it for our preview. When we go into the prediction side of it, I'm going to say the Ravens are going to lose their first game since 2015 in the preseason. And the reason is I don't think McSorley or Joe Callahan, the camp arm they brought in, is really going to effectively pass the ball. I think they'll run the ball well with all these running backs, especially Kenneth Dixon trying to get as many yards as he can. But in the end, I think that the Ravens' defense is a little thin right now, especially early in the preseason. They haven't really gotten together. A lot of starters are not going to play at all. The Jaguars are going to be probably looking for more offensive starters than the Ravens' defense is going to be, so they're going to be playing a lot more people maybe. So looking at the Jaguars, I think they're going to beat the Ravens 28-13 in this preseason game on Thursday night. Starts at 7:30. Don't forget that. Make sure you can watch it. If you're not in the Baltimore area and you've got NFL Game Pass, you can watch it live on NFL Game Pass. That's how I will be watching it. So stay tuned to the Ravens preseason game. It's going to be a lot of fun. But I do think they are going to lose, and it doesn't really matter that much, but it is disappointing to see the Ravens streak potentially end since, winning every game throughout 2016, 2017, and 2018 preseasons. Basically 12-game winning streak in the preseason. It'd be pretty lame to see that end. But that'll be it for today's episode of Preview and Predictions. We're going to try and develop this into a little bit more better production. It was kind of a last-minute decision to make this into video form, so I'm just trying to play around with it for a little bit. By the time the regular season kicks off, we're going to have a much better way of doing this, but I wanted to make sure that at least the concept could come through and see how you guys react to it. Make sure you give me your feedback. Make sure you give me any suggestions you might have. And, of course, hit the subscribe button, notification bell, get our videos when they come out. And, of course, sign up for the Baltimore Feather newsletter if you want all our articles emailed to you, so it's really easy for you to get them. I'm trying to make the best quality content on there for you as well. That's where more news is going to happen. Opinion articles as well. I like to write columns usually throughout the season. But, of course, you've got our videos on here, which if you find more enjoyable, again, you can hit the subscribe button on YouTube. So thank you very much for watching. This has been Preview and Predictions hosted by Chris Linfante for the preseason Week 1 edition. Here, and the Baltimore Ravens will play again the Jacksonville Jaguars. You can find it 7:30. I believe it's going to be CBS or NBC. But check your local listings, obviously. And if you're not local to the Baltimore area, hit up NFL Game Pass. That's how I'm going to be watching it tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And this is, again, Chris Linfante signing out.